Yours, she echoed, her voice barely audible. Yes, Clara interjected, her tone clipped. There was a mistake at the hospital. You were never meant to be part of this process, but unfortunately, you ended up as our surrogate. Lorna's legs wobbled, and she sank into a chair. I don't understand. How is this even possible? Henry pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. The hospital confirmed it. We've come to make things right. We want to take care of you and the baby. You don't have to go through this alone. For the first time in weeks, Lorna felt a flicker of hope. But that hope was quickly overshadowed by a new wave of uncertainty. Could she really trust these strangers? And what would this mean for her already fragile life? I don't trust them, Aunt Regina said, glaring at Henry and Clara. But if they are paying, she can go. The revelation of Lorna's pregnancy being linked to Henry and Clara left the household tense. Lorna sat quietly at the kitchen table while her aunt grilled the couple. So, you're saying you want to take her to your mansion? Regina asked, folding her arms. Only to provide proper care, Henry replied calmly. This isn't an ideal situation for any of us, but the baby is ours, and we feel responsible for Lorna's well-being. Lorna looked up, surprised. It was the first time anyone had shown concern for her well-being in years. Regina, however, saw an opportunity. And what's in it for her? For me, she asked sharply. Clara raised an eyebrow. We are prepared to cover all medical expenses, provide her with a safe and comfortable environment, and compensate her for her time and inconvenience. Regina's eyes lit up. Compensation, you say? Lorna's heart sank. She felt like a commodity being sold off, but she didn't have the energy to protest. She simply nodded when Henry turned to her and asked, Lorna, is this something you're willing to do? Yes, she said softly, unsure if she was making the right choice. Lorna's breath caught in her throat as the car pulled into the mansion's driveway. The estate was massive, with a sprawling garden adorned with fountains and flower beds that seemed to stretch endlessly. Towering gates loomed behind her, reminding her of how far removed this place was from the modest home she'd grown up in. Henry opened the car door for her, his kind smile reassuring. Welcome, Lorna. This will be your home for the foreseeable future. She stepped out hesitantly, clutching her small bag of belongings. Clara walked ahead, her heels echoing on the stone steps as if to establish dominance in every space she occupied. The grand foyer left Lorna awestruck. Chandeliers sparkled like a sea of stars, and polished floors reflected her uncertain face. A group of house staff stood in neat rows, waiting to greet her. This is Mrs. Pearson, our head housekeeper, Henry said, introducing a middle-aged woman with a warm demeanor. She'll make sure you're comfortable. Mrs. Pearson smiled and gestured for Lorna to follow her. Your room is ready, dear. Let me show you. Lorna's room was unlike anything she had ever seen. The walls were painted a soft lavender, and a four-poster bed sat in the center, draped in elegant white linens. A balcony overlooked the garden, and a vase of fresh roses sat on the nightstand. It's beautiful, Lorna whispered, her fingers brushing the silky fabric of the curtains. Mrs. Pearson nodded. You'll be well cared for here, but if you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. That night, as Lorna lay in the massive bed, she couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. The luxury was overwhelming, but so was the uncertainty of her future in this strange, new world. You're being too generous, Clara snapped, her voice dripping with resentment. She's not family. Henry sighed, sipping his coffee as they sat in the breakfast room. Clara, she's carrying our child. We agreed to treat her with care and respect. Clara leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. Care and respect don't mean pampering her. She's already getting more attention than she deserves. Unbeknownst to them, Lorna was just outside the room, her footsteps freezing as Clara's words reached her ears. She clenched her fists, her heart sinking. No matter where she went, it seemed she was always an unwelcome burden. Later that day, Clara's jealousy manifested in subtle ways. She ignored Lorna during dinner, passing dishes around the table without offering her any. When Henry noticed and served Lorna himself, Clara's glare could have melted ice. In the weeks that followed, Clara began to micromanage the household staff, ensuring Lorna was given mundane chores under the guise of keeping her active. Pregnancy doesn't mean you're helpless, Clara said with a sharp smile when Lorna hesitated to lift a heavy basket of laundry. A little work won't hurt. Though she didn't argue, Lorna's back ached by the end of each day. The mansion's splendor was starting to feel more like a gilded cage. Henry noticed the change in Lorna. She grew quieter, her cheerful demeanor replaced with tired smiles and downcast eyes. One afternoon, he found her sitting alone in the garden, her hands resting on her small but growing belly. He approached cautiously, not wanting to startle her. "Is everything all right?" he asked, sitting beside her on the stone bench. Lorna nodded but didn't meet his gaze. "I'm fine." Henry wasn't convinced. "You've been through a lot. It's okay to admit when things aren't fine." The kindness in his voice made her chest tighten. She wanted to tell him about Clara's treatment but feared it would only cause more trouble. Instead, she changed the subject, asking about his work and his life. As the days turned into weeks, their conversations became more frequent. Henry found himself drawn to Lorna's humility and resilience, while she began to see him as a source of comfort in an otherwise hostile environment. But their growing bond didn't escape Clara's notice. The mansion was unusually quiet that morning, with only the soft rustling of curtains and distant chirps from the garden breaking the silence. Lorna, balancing a tray of teacups, moved carefully along the polished marble floors toward the sitting room where Clara waited. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows highlighted her swollen belly, a constant reminder of the child she carried. Just as she approached the doorway, Clara rounded the corner abruptly. The collision was unavoidable. The tray wobbled precariously before tilting, sending teacups clattering to the floor. The delicate porcelain shattered, and the hot liquid splashed across the rug, leaving dark stains. Clara froze for a moment, taking in the mess. Then her face contorted with fury. "You clumsy fool," she shrieked, her voice echoing through the hall. Lorna instinctively stepped back, her heart pounding. I'm sorry," she stammered, crouching quickly to pick up the broken pieces. But Clara wasn't interested in apologies. Her rage boiled over, and before Lorna could shield herself, Clara raised her hand. The sharp crack of the slap echoed louder than the broken china. The force of the blow sent Lorna reeling to the side. Pain radiated from her cheek, and tears welled up in her eyes, but she bit her lip to keep them from falling. She refused to give Clara the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "You're pathetic," Clara spat, towering over her. "Can't even handle something as simple as serving tea. You should be grateful we even let you stay in this house." Henry sat in his study late one night, staring at the faint bruise on Lorna's arm that he'd noticed earlier in the day. It wasn't the first time he had seen something unusual. Her quiet demeanor, the way she avoided eye contact when asked about her well-being, and the subtle winces when she moved, it all painted a picture of someone enduring far more than she let on. He tried to focus on the financial reports in front of him, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Lorna. "Something's not right," he murmured to himself. The next morning, over breakfast, he watched Clara carefully. She was her usual sharp-tongued self, ordering the stuff around and barely acknowledging Lorna, who sat quietly at the far end of the table. "Lorna, are you feeling all right?" Henry asked gently. Lorna's head snapped up. She nodded quickly, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up her glass of water. Clara interjected before Lorna could say more. "She's fine. Pregnancy makes girls like her a bit moody." Henry's jaw tightened at Clara's dismissive tone. Later that day, he approached Lorna in the garden. She was tending to a row of roses, her delicate touch contrasting with the roughness of her bruised hands. "Lorna," he said softly, crouching beside her. "If something's wrong, you can tell me." She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the house as if afraid someone might overhear. "I'm fine, really," she whispered, but her voice wavered. Henry didn't press her, but the seed of suspicion was firmly planted. That evening, he called his best friend, Mark. Mark was the kind of friend who spoke his mind, whether you wanted to hear it or not. "Something's definitely up," Henry explained, pacing his office as he held the phone to his ear. "She's scared, Mark. I can see it in her eyes. But she won't say a word." Mark listened intently before responding. "Look, you've got two choices: confront Clara directly, or gather proof first. If you want my opinion, get proof. Women like Clara will deny everything unless you have hard evidence." Henry frowned. "How would I even do that?" Mark chuckled. "It's the 21st century, Henry. Install cameras. If something's happening, they'll reveal the truth." The idea unsettled Henry. He didn't like the thought of invading anyone's privacy, but he knew Mark was right. If Clara was mistreating Lorna, he needed undeniable evidence. The next morning, Henry made a decision. He would do whatever it took to protect Lorna and the child she was carrying. Henry waited for the perfect opportunity to set his plan in motion. Clara mentioned wanting to take Lorna shopping for maternity clothes, a rare gesture that Henry suspected had ulterior motives. "That's a great idea," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "Why don't you make a day of it? I'll give the staff a day off as well, so the house is nice and quiet when you return." Clara agreed, pleased with the suggestion. Lorna, however, looked uneasy. When the house was empty, Mark arrived with a team of technicians. They worked swiftly, installing tiny, discreet cameras in key areas: the kitchen, the living room, the hallways, and even Lorna's bedroom. "Are you sure about this?" Henry asked, watching as a technician secured a camera above the staircase. Mark clapped him on the shoulder. "You're doing the right thing. If Clara's innocent, you'll have nothing to worry about. But if she's not?" Henry nodded grimly. "Let's hope for the best." By the time Clara and Lorna returned, the cameras were fully operational, and the house appeared exactly as they had left it. Clara didn't suspect a thing. Henry's office was bathed in the soft glow of his desk lamp as he sat hunched over his laptop. The air felt heavy, his heart already bracing for what he might uncover. Mark's instructions on accessing the hidden camera feeds had been simple enough, but nothing could prepare him for the truth he was about to see. Clicking into the first clip, Henry was met with a mundane, a seemingly normal day in the mansion. Lorna moved quietly, diligently dusting furniture and tidying rooms. Clara lounged in the living room, a cup of tea in hand, occasionally barking orders to the staff. For a moment, Henry allowed himself to hope that maybe he had been mistaken. Maybe his instincts about Clara's behavior had been wrong. But as he scrolled further, the tone of the footage darkened. Henry's stomach tightened as he opened the next video. The camera positioned in the kitchen captured Clara stalking toward Lorna with an icy glare. "Did I not tell you to fold the laundry?" Clara snapped, her voice sharp and commanding. Lorna, holding a dishcloth, turned to face her. "I was just about to. Don't you dare talk back to me." Clara's hand shot out, slapping the dishcloth out of Lorna's hand. It fluttered to the ground as Clara loomed over her, a smirk of satisfaction spreading across her face. Henry's grip on the mouse tightened. His eyes burned with anger as he watched Lorna bow her head, muttering an apology before retreating toward the laundry room. In the next clip, the camera in the dining room captured Clara ordering Lorna to her knees. "You missed a spot," Clara sneered, pointing at the tiled floor. Lorna, her pregnant belly straining against her clothes, knelt slowly, wincing as she leaned forward with a scrub brush. "I'll have the maids take care of it," Lorna offered timidly, trying to reason with Clara. But Clara's voice turned venomous. "You think you can dictate how things are done in my house? You'll do as I say, or I'll make you regret it." Henry could barely keep watching as Lorna scrubbed the floors, her movements slow and deliberate, clearly struggling with discomfort. When Henry clicked on the footage from Lorna's bedroom, he felt a deep sense of dread. The timestamp showed it was late at night. Clara stormed into the room, her face a mask of fury. She was holding something in her hand, a hot iron. Lorna, startled, stood from her bed, instinctively taking a step back. "Clara, what's wrong?" she asked cautiously, her voice trembling. Clara's eyes blazed with anger. "What's wrong? You think you're so special, don't you? Just because you're carrying his child, you think you've won him over." "No, that's not true," Lorna pleaded, shaking her head. Clara advanced, the iron still in her hand. "Don't lie to me," she shouted, her voice echoing off the walls. Without warning, Clara grabbed Lorna's arm and pressed the hot iron against her skin. Lorna's scream of pain tore through the room. She crumpled to the ground, clutching her arm as tears streamed down her face. Clara stood over her, satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. "Stay in your place, or this will just be the beginning," Clara spat before storming out of the room. Henry paused the footage, his hands trembling. His breathing was shallow, and his chest felt tight. He couldn't bear to watch anymore. Slamming the laptop shut, he pushed his chair back and stood abruptly, pacing the room. His mind reeled, each image replaying like a nightmare he couldn't escape. The sound of Lorna's scream echoed in his head, chilling him to the core. "This has to stop," he muttered, his voice low and trembling with rage. He picked up his phone and dialed Mark. When his friend answered, Henry's voice was firm, almost cold. "I need you at the mansion. Now." Mark didn't ask questions. "I'm on my way." As Henry ended the call, he glanced at the laptop, the device that had revealed the ugly truth. He felt a storm of emotions, guilt for not seeing the signs earlier, anger at Clara for her cruelty, and an overwhelming sense of protectiveness toward Lorna and the child she carried. By the time Mark arrived, Henry had already reviewed the footage again, ensuring he hadn't missed anything. He greeted his friend at the door, his expression grim. Mark raised an eyebrow. "What's going on?" Henry led him to the study, replaying the most damning clips. Mark's face darkened with every second, his hands clenching into fists. "This is inexcusable," Mark said when the footage ended. "What are you going to do?" Henry stared out the window, his jaw tight. "I'm going to confront her. And I'm going to protect Lorna, no matter what it takes." Mark nodded. "You'll need to be careful. Clara won't take this lightly." Henry turned to face his friend, his resolve evident in his eyes. "I don't care what Clara does. Lorna and the baby come first now." Unaware of Henry's discovery, Lorna spent the evening tending to her bruised arm in silence. She stared at the makeshift bandage she had wrapped around the burn, her thoughts racing. She didn't know how much longer she could endure Clara's cruelty, but she couldn't bring herself to tell Henry the truth. What if it only made things worse? Little did she know, the truth was already out, and Henry was about to change everything. Did you enjoy the tale? I hope so. Let us meet in part 3. Please like and share the video, drop your comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell for more enchanting tales like this one. Thanks for watching and see you on the next.